The red sun of Carathis Prime cast long shadows across the rocky ground. In the distance, the sounds of battle echoed through the valley, but these were not the sounds of war between armies. These were the sounds of young creatures dying. Kralvox stood on the cliff edge, watching his people's future disappear. Below him, another group of young Velthon had entered the trial grounds. They were strong, they were fast, they had claws that could cut through metal and scales that could stop bullets, but they were dying anyway. The beasts in the trial grounds had changed. What used to be a hard but fair test had become a death sentence. The creatures that lived there had grown stronger, smarter, and more deadly. They worked together now in ways they never had before. The young Velthon, following the old ways of single combat and brute force, stood no chance. Kralvox's own son, Corvin, would be ready for the trials soon. So would Zeth and Nera, two cubs he had taken in when their parents died. All three were strong and brave. All three would probably die if things stayed the same. The Alpha Prime of the Vilethon had ruled his people for 30 years. He had seen many things that seemed impossible, but what he was thinking now would seem crazy to everyone who knew him. He was thinking about asking a human for help. Humans were soft. Everyone in the galaxy knew this. They had no claws, no scales, no natural weapons. They were slow and weak. Most species saw them as easy prey. The Vilethon had always ignored them completely. Why would apex predators care about such weak creatures? But there were stories, strange stories that came from traders and travelers. Stories about a human who lived alone on Caleron, one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy. This human had been there for 10 years. Not only was he still alive, but the deadly creatures of that world seemed to follow him around like pets. The stories said his name was Park Hyun. They said he could walk among the giant sandworms without being eaten. They said the flying razor birds brought him food instead of trying to kill him. They said he had turned a world of monsters into his personal hunting ground. Kralvox had dismissed these stories at first. Humans telling lies to make themselves seem important. But the stories kept coming from different sources. Velthon scouts, Krillian merchants, even proud Altarian warriors whispered about the strange human who made friends with death itself. Behind him, Kralvox heard footsteps. He turned to see Velthara, his mate and the mother of Corvin. Her golden scales caught the red sunlight as she approached. "Another group failed," she said. Her voice was sad, but not surprised. "Only 2 came back alive, both badly wounded." Kralvox nodded. The numbers were getting worse every month. Soon there would be no young Velthon left to carry on their bloodline. Their proud race of apex predators would simply end. "The Council wants to make the trials easier," Velthara continued. "They say we should find weaker beasts for the cubs to fight." "Weaker beasts make weaker hunters," Kralvox replied. "If we do that, our cubs might live, but they will not be Velthon anymore. They will be something lesser." Velthara moved closer to her mate. She had known him long enough to see when he was planning something dangerous. "What are you thinking, my alpha?" Kralvox was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and careful. "There is a human, on Caleron. They say he has done impossible things." "A human?" Velthara's voice showed her shock. "You would trust our cubs to a prey species. I would trust our cubs to someone who has survived where we would die," Kralvox said. "The creatures of Caleron make our trial grounds look like a peaceful garden. Yet this human lives among them, not just lives, thrives." Velthara was quiet. She knew her mate was right about one thing. If they did nothing, their cubs would die anyway. At least with the human, they might learn something new. "The Council will never agree to this," she said finally. "Then I will not ask the Council. Kralvox replied. I will take Corvin, Zeth, and Nira myself. If I am wrong, I will face the consequences. If I am right, our people might have a future. 3 days later, Kralvox stood in the main hall of their stronghold. Before him were the 3 cubs he had chosen. Corvin was tall and strong, with dark scales that seemed to absorb light. His claws were already longer than most adult Vailthon. Zeth was faster than any cub Kralvox had ever seen, with bright blue markings that showed his noble bloodline. Nira was the smallest, but her intelligence was sharp as her claws. She could solve puzzles that confused full-grown hunters. You will come with me on a journey, Kralvox told them. We are going to meet someone who will teach you things I cannot. Who? Corvin asked. As Kralvox's son, he had the right to question his father's decisions. A human, Kralvox said simply. The 3 cubs looked at each other in confusion. Zeth spoke first. Father, humans are prey. What could a prey animal teach us about hunting? That, Kralvox said, is exactly what we are going to find out. The journey to Kailaron took 5 days in Kralvox's personal ship. During the trip, the cubs asked many questions. Why were they going to see a human? Why not learn from other Vailthon masters? What could someone so weak possibly teach them? Kralvox answered what he could, but mostly he told them to wait and see. He was not even sure what to expect himself. The stories about Park Hyun seemed too strange to be true, but strange times called for strange solutions. When they arrived at Kailaron, the planet looked like a nightmare made real. The sky was the color of dried blood. Strange plants grew in twisted shapes that hurt to look at. In the distance, they could see massive creatures moving through the red desert. Just watching them made the cubs nervous. How does anything live here? Nira whispered. Very carefully, said a voice behind them. They all turned to see a figure walking out of the desert. It was smaller than any of them, with pale skin and dark hair. It wore simple clothes that looked old but well made. Most shocking of all, it was completely calm. This was Park Hyun, the human who lived among monsters. You must be Kralvox, the human said. His voice was steady and confident. I got your message. These are the cubs you want me to train? Kralvox nodded. They are my best, but they are dying in our trials. Our old ways are not enough anymore. Hyun looked at each of the cubs carefully. They stared back at him, trying to understand how something so small could seem so sure of itself. Behind Hyun, they could see shapes moving in the distance, huge creatures that should have been attacking the small human. Instead, they seemed to be watching and waiting. Training will take 6 months, Hyun said. Maybe longer. Your cubs will learn things that go against everything your people believe. They will change in ways you might not recognize. Are you sure you want this? Kralvox thought of all the young Vailthon who had died in the trials. He thought of his son, who would face those same trials soon. He thought of his people, slowly dying out because they could not adapt. Yes, he said. We are sure. Hyun nodded. Then we begin tomorrow. But understand this, I will not make them weaker. I will not make them less than what they are. But I will make them different. Whether that difference saves them or damns them depends on how much they are willing to learn. As the red sun set behind the twisted landscape of Kailaron, 3 young Vailthon prepared for a training that would change everything they thought they knew about being apex predators. The first day of training did not go as the cubs expected. Corvin, Zeth, and Nira had spent the night in a shelter that Hyun had built into the side of a cliff. It was simple but strong, and it kept out the sounds of the creatures that hunted in the darkness. When morning came, they were ready for combat training, weapon practice, or hunting lessons. Instead, Hyun told them to sit down and watch. Watch what? Zeth asked. His blue markings flickered with annoyance. There is nothing here but rocks and sand. Look closer, Hyun said. He sat down cross-legged on the ground and pointed to a spot about 20 feet away. Tell me what you see? The three cubs looked where he pointed. At first, they saw nothing special, just more red sand and strange, twisted rocks. But as they watched, small movements caught their attention. Tiny creatures scurried between the rocks. Plants that looked dead suddenly opened flower-like structures to catch moisture from the air. Insects that perfectly matched the color of the sand moved in patterns that seemed random but had a hidden purpose. I see small prey animals, Corvin said. Nothing worth hunting. I see possible food sources, Nira added, but nothing challenging. I see targets for practice, Zeth concluded. Hyun nodded but did not seem satisfied with their answers. Now tell me why they are still alive. This question confused the cubs. Why would they not be alive? They were just small, weak creatures. They have no defenses, Corvin said slowly. No claws, no speed, no armor. They should have been eaten long ago. Yet here they are, Hyun pointed out, surviving on one of the most dangerous worlds in the galaxy, while your people, with all their strength and weapons, are dying in trials that used to be easy. Why do you think that is? The cubs had no answer. In their minds, strength was everything. The strong lived, the weak died. It was the natural order. Let me show you something, Hyun said. He stood up and walked toward the small creatures they had been watching. The cubs expected them to run away or hide. Instead, something amazing happened. The tiny animals came toward Hyun. Some climbed onto his hands. Others gathered around his feet. None of them seemed afraid. How? Nira breathed. They should fear you. All prey fears predators. Do they look like they fear me? Hyun asked. He held out his hand and a small lizard-like creature climbed onto his palm. This is Minho. I named him after a friend from my home world. He has been living near my shelter for 3 years, the cubs stared. In their culture, prey animals existed only to be hunted and eaten. The idea of naming one, of knowing it as an individual, was completely foreign to them. Watch Minho for the next hour, Hyun said. Do not move. Do not hunt. Just watch and think about what you see. Zeth's patience snapped first. This is a waste of time. We came here to learn how to be better hunters, not to watch tiny prey animals do nothing. You came here to learn, Hyun corrected. I decide what that means. Zeth stood up, his claws extending. He was almost 7 feet tall and could tear through metal with his bare hands. I challenge you, human. Prove you are worthy to teach us. Hyun looked at the young Vilton calmly. You want to fight me? I want to establish dominance. That is how my people learn. The strong teach the weak. And what happens if I refuse to fight? Zeth was taken aback. In Velthon's society, refusing a challenge was the same as admitting defeat. Then you admit you are too weak to teach us, and we leave. I see, Hyun said. He thought for a moment, then nodded. Very well. But we do this my way. Zeth grinned, showing rows of sharp teeth. Finally, they would see what this strange human was really made of. He crouched into a fighting stance, ready to show his speed and power. Attack me, Hyun said. He stood perfectly still, hands at his sides. Zeth lunged forward with incredible speed, his claws aimed for Hyun's chest, a strike that would end the fight in seconds, but somehow Hyun was not there anymore. Zeth found himself grabbing empty air as Hyun simply stepped to the side. Confused, but not discouraged, Zeth spun around and attacked again. This time he used his full speed, moving so fast that Corvin and Nira could barely see him. But again, Hyun was simply somewhere else when the attack arrived. This continued for several minutes. Zeth attacked with everything he had, claws, kicks, even his tail. Each time, Hyun moved just enough to avoid the strike. He never attacked back. He never seemed hurried or afraid. He just moved like water, flowing around Zeth's fury. Finally, Zeth stopped, breathing hard. He had not even touched the human. "How?" he panted. "How are you so fast?" "I am not fast," Hyun said. He was not even breathing hard. "You are predictable." "What does that mean?" "It means you fight the same way every Velthon has fought for thousands of years. You rely on strength and speed. You attack in straight lines. You expect your enemy to meet your force with force." Hyun picked up a small stone and tossed it gently to Zeth. "Catch this." Zeth caught the stone easily with one clawed hand. "Good," Hyun said. "Now catch this." He picked up another stone, but instead of throwing it straight at Zeth, he tossed it high into the air. Zeth moved to where he thought the stone would land, but the wind caught it and it fell several feet away. "The wind moved it," Zeth said. "Exactly. The stone was not stronger or faster than you, but it used forces you did not expect. It adapted to conditions you ignored." Hyun gestured toward the small creatures around them. "These animals survive because they do not fight the way you expect them to. They use the environment. They cooperate. They think." Corvin, who had been watching quietly, spoke up. "Are you saying we should fight like prey animals?" "I am saying you should fight like successful animals," Hyun replied. "Minho there has survived 3 years on a world that kills most visitors in 3 hours, not because he is strong, but because he is smart." As if hearing his name, the small lizard creature scurried over to Hyun and climbed up his leg to sit on his shoulder. From there, it made a series of soft, chirping sounds. "He is telling me about the sandstorm that is coming tomorrow," Hyun said casually, "and about the new hunting pack of razor wings that moved into the eastern canyon yesterday." Nira's eyes widened. "It can talk?" "Not in words," Hyun said, "but we understand each other. He gives me information about the environment. I give him protection and sometimes food. We both benefit." "You cooperate with prey?" Corvin asked. The idea seemed to disturb him deeply. "I cooperate with anyone who helps me survive," Hyun said. "Survival is not about being the strongest. It is about being the most adaptable." Over the next few hours, Hyun showed them more examples. He pointed out how the small creatures worked together to find water and food, how they shared information about dangers, how they took only what they needed and left the rest for others. "But they are still prey," Zeth insisted. "We are predators. It is our nature to hunt and kill." "Yes," Hyun agreed. "You are predators. But what makes a successful predator?" "Strength," Corvin said immediately. "Speed," Zeth added. "Sharp claws and teeth," Nira concluded. Hyun shook his head. "Those things help, but they are not what makes a successful predator. Do you know what the most successful predator on my home world is?" The cubs guessed various large, dangerous animals. Tigers, sharks, giant eagles. "Humans," Hyun said simply. "We have no claws. We are not particularly fast or strong. We have no natural armor or weapons. But we are the apex predators of our world. Do you know why?" The cubs could not answer. It did not make sense to them. "Because we think," Hyun said. "We plan. We adapt. We use tools. We work together. We understand our prey and our environment better than any other species." He gestured toward the vast, dangerous landscape around them. "That is why I can live here when others cannot. Not because I am stronger than the creatures here, but because I understand them." As the day went on, Hyun taught them to really see their environment. He showed them signs of animal movements they had missed, weather patterns that predicted danger or opportunity. the complex relationships between different species that kept the ecosystem balanced. Tomorrow, Hyun said as the red sun began to set, we will start learning how to hunt the way I hunt. Not with just claws and teeth, but with minds and understanding. That night, as the cubs settled into their shelter, they talked quietly among themselves. This is not what I expected, Nira said. He defeated Zeth without even fighting, Corvin pointed out. There might be something to his methods. Zeth was still frustrated, but also curious. He moved like no warrior I have ever seen. If he can, teach us to do that. Outside their shelter, the sounds of Kailaron's nighttime hunters filled the air. But for the first time, the cubs were beginning to understand that surviving those hunters might require more than just being better fighters. It might require learning to think in completely new ways. 3 weeks had passed since the cubs arrived on Kailaron. Each day brought new lessons that challenged everything they thought they knew about being predators. Today, Hyun led them deeper into the desert than they had ever gone before. The landscape here was even more hostile. Jagged rocks that could cut through their scales, plants that released toxic spores when disturbed, and pools of water that looked safe but would dissolve flesh in seconds. Tell me what you learned yesterday, Hyun said as they walked. Nira spoke first. She had always been the quickest to understand Hyun's lessons. The blue flowers that bloom at dawn are not just pretty. They show where underground water is closest to the surface. Good, Hyun nodded. Corvin, the scratch marks on the red. Rocks tell us which direction the wind usually blows. This helps predict where dangerous gas pockets might form. Excellent. Zeth? Zeth had been the most resistant to these new ideas, but even he was starting to see their value. The small herds of jumper beasts follow the same paths their ancestors used for thousands of years. If we learn these paths, we can predict where they will be without having to track them. Very good, Hyun said. You are all learning to read the world around you instead of just charging through it. But today we learned something even more important. They reached the top of a ridge and looked down into a valley below. In the center was a large oasis with clear blue water and green plants. Around the water, dozens of different animals were drinking peacefully together. Look at that, Corvin breathed. Prey animals and predators, all in the same place. Why are they not fighting? Hyun smiled. Because they understand something your people have forgotten. Water is more important than any individual hunt. If they fought over it, some would win, but the water source might be damaged or destroyed. Then everyone loses. The cubs watched in amazement. They could see creatures that would normally hunt each other standing just a few feet apart. Large predators drank, while small prey animals waited their turn. When the predators finished, they moved away without attacking anyone. This is impossible, Zeth said. Predators hunt prey. It is the natural order. Is it? Hyun asked. Or is that just one way to see the world? He led them down into the valley. As they got closer to the oasis, the cubs tensed. They expected the animals to scatter or attack. Instead, many of them looked up calmly and then went back to drinking. They know you are predators, Hyun said quietly. But they also know that you are with me, and they know I follow the water law. What is the water law? Nira asked. No hunting at the water source, Hyun explained. Everyone drinks in peace. The strong do not attack the weak here. It benefits everyone. A massive creature approached the water. It was twice the size of a Velton, with armor, plating, and claws that could tear through stone. The cubs instinctively prepared to fight or run, but the creature simply nodded its great head toward Hyun and began to drink. That is Sora, Hyun said casually. She is the alpha predator of this region. We have an understanding. Understanding? Corvin could not believe what he was seeing. You have made friends with an apex predator? Not friends exactly, Hyun said. Partners. She protects this oasis from creatures that would pollute it or destroy it. In return, I share information about threats to her territory and sometimes help heal injured members of her pack. As if to prove his point, a smaller version of the massive creature limped toward them. It was clearly in pain, favoring one leg. Sora made a low rumbling sound, and the injured creature approached Hyun carefully. "This is her daughter, Ji-won," Hyun said. He knelt down and gently examined the injured leg. "Stepped on a poisoned spine 3 days ago. The wound is infected." The cubs watched in shock as Hyun cleaned and treated the wound. The creature that could have killed him easily stayed perfectly still and let him work. When he was finished, both creatures made soft rumbling sounds before moving away. "You healed a predator that could eat you," Szeth said. His voice showed his confusion. "Why?" "Because healthy predators maintain the balance," Hyun replied. "If Sora's pack becomes weak, other more dangerous creatures move into this territory. Creatures that do not follow the water law. Creatures that would make this place unsafe for everyone, including us." Over the following days, Hyun showed them more examples of this strange cooperation. He introduced them to Tai-hyung, a bird-like creature that scouted for dangerous weather patterns and shared the information with other animals. There was Hoseok, a burrowing animal that cleaned poison from water sources in exchange for protection from flying predators. "Every creature here has a role," Hyun explained. "Every creature provides something useful to the others. This is why they all survive in a place that kills most visitors." The cubs were slowly beginning to understand, but it went against every instinct they had been taught. Velthon society was built on dominance and strength. The strong ruled, the weak served, or died. The idea of cooperation between different species seemed impossible. "But what about hunting?" Nira asked. "We still need to eat. Are you saying we should not kill anything?" "Of course you need to hunt," Hyun said, "but hunt smart, not just hard." He led them to an area where a herd of medium-sized herbivores grazed. These creatures were fast and had sharp horns for defense, but they would be suitable prey for young Velthon. "Show me how you would hunt these," Hyun said. The cubs immediately began planning a typical Velthon attack. Szeth would use his speed to get ahead of the herd and turn them back. Corvin and Nira would attack from the sides, using their strength to bring down the largest animals they could catch. "Stop," Hyun said, before they could move. "Now tell me what you know about these animals." "They are prey," Corvin said. "They are food." "What else?" The cubs looked more carefully. After weeks of Hyun's training, they were better at observation. "They have young with them," Nira noticed. "Small ones that cannot run as fast." "The adults are protecting the young," Szeth added. "They will fight harder if we threaten their babies." "Good," Hyun said. "What else?" They watched longer. "They have scouts," Corvin realized. "Some animals watch for danger while others eat." "The wind is blowing toward us," Nira said. "They will smell us soon. There are tracks showing other predators. Hunt here regularly," Szeth concluded. "These animals are used to being attacked." "Excellent," Hyun said. "Now instead of just attacking, think about what you really need. Do you need to kill the whole herd?" "No," Nira said slowly. "We only need enough food for today." "Do you need to kill the strongest animals?" "No," Corvin admitted. "We need meat, not a challenge." "Do you need to cause fear and chaos?" "No," Szeth said, though this went most against his training. "We just need to eat." "Then let me show you a different way to hunt." Hyun led them in a wide circle around the herd. Instead of charging in, he had them watch and wait. They learned the animals' patterns. Which ones were old or sick, which ones wandered, away from the protection of the group. How the herd moved when it was relaxed versus when it was afraid. "There," Hyun pointed to an older animal that was grazing apart from the others. "That one is already weakening. It will not survive the next harsh season anyway. Taking it does not harm the herd's future." "But it would be an easy kill," Szeth protested. Where is the honor in hunting the weak? Honor is a luxury, Hyun said. Survival is a necessity. Besides, think about what happens if you attack the healthy animals. The cubs considered this. The herd becomes afraid, Nira said. They leave this area. The healthy animals reproduce and make the herd stronger, Corvin added. Other predators have to work harder to find food, Zeth concluded. Some might starve. And if predators starve, what happens to the balance of this ecosystem? Hyun asked. It collapses, Nira said, her eyes widening as she understood. Too many prey animals would eat all the plants. The land would become desert. Everyone would starve. Now you begin to see, Hyun said. A smart predator does not just think about today's meal. A smart predator thinks about tomorrow's hunt and next year's hunt, and the hunts their children will need. They took the old animal quickly and cleanly. The rest of the herd barely reacted. Within an hour, they were grazing peacefully again. As they prepared their meal, Hyun taught them another lesson. Take only what you need. Leave the rest. Leave it? Corvin asked. But we killed it. It is ours. Is it? Hyun pointed to several scavenger animals that were watching them from a distance. Those creatures need food too. They clean bones and spread nutrients through the soil. They are part of the cycle that keeps this ecosystem healthy. You want us to share our kill with scavengers? Zeth's voice showed his disbelief. I want you to understand that your kill is part of something larger than just your hunger, Hyun replied. That night, as they sat around their small fire, the cubs were quiet. Everything they were learning challenged the basic beliefs of their people. But they could not deny that Hyun's methods worked. They were learning to hunt more efficiently, to avoid unnecessary dangers, and to understand their environment in ways that made survival easier. The other Velthon will not understand this, Nira said finally. They will think we have become weak. Have you become weak? Hyun asked. The cubs thought about this. In the past 3 weeks, they had learned to move more quietly, strike more accurately, and avoid dangers they would never have noticed before. The storm came without warning, even though all the signs had been there. Hyun had been teaching the cubs to read weather patterns for weeks, but this storm was different. It appeared on the horizon like a wall of darkness, moving faster than any storm should move. The wind that came before it carried the smell of electricity and danger. Cave system North Ridge, Hyun said quickly. Move now. The cubs had learned to trust Hyun's commands without question. They gathered their few belongings and ran toward the rocky hills. Behind them, the storm caught up with frightening speed. Lightning that was not quite the right color flickered through the dark clouds. The wind howled with sounds that seemed almost alive. They reached the cave entrance just as the first drops of rain began to fall. But this was not normal rain. Where it touched the ground, the rocks hissed and steamed. The water was full of acids from the storm clouds. Deeper, Hyun said, leading them into the cave system. This storm will last for days. The caves were larger than they had expected. Tunnels led off in all directions, carved by thousands of years of similar storms. The cubs' enhanced night vision let them see easily in the darkness, but even they were surprised by how extensive the cave network was. They had been walking for about an hour when they heard the sounds. Small, frightened chirping noises came from somewhere ahead of them. The cubs immediately went into hunting mode, claws extending and senses sharpening. But Hyun held up a hand to stop them. Listen more carefully, he said. The cubs did as he asked. The sounds were not coming from one source, but from many. And they were not the sounds of a predator or something dangerous. They were the sounds of creatures in distress. Scared animals, Nira said. Trapped by the storm, like us. Young ones, Corvin added. He could tell by the pitch of the sounds. They followed the noises deeper into the cave system. In a large chamber, they found the source. A family of indigenous creatures had taken shelter from the storm. There were 2 adults and 5 young ones. The cubs recognized them as tunnel worms, herbivores that normally lived underground but sometimes came to the surface to feed. The problem was obvious immediately. Part of the cave ceiling had collapsed, blocking the tunnel worms' normal exit. They were trapped, and the rising water from the storm was starting to flood their hiding place. Natural prey, Zeth said quietly. Trapped and helpless. The adult tunnel worms were about the same size as the cubs, but they were not fighters. They had powerful digging claws, but no real combat abilities. Their skin was soft and vulnerable. Their meat was considered quite good by Velthon standards. Easy. Hunting, Corvin agreed. The storm has given us a gift. But something had changed in the cubs over the past 2 months of training. Instead of immediately attacking, they found themselves thinking about what Hyun had taught them. Wait, Nira said. Look at them more carefully. The cubs observed the trapped family. The adult tunnel worms were not just scared, they were exhausted. They had been digging frantically to try to create a new exit, but the rocks were too hard, and they were making little progress. The young ones were huddled together, making those distressed sounds. They are trying to protect their children, Nira continued. Just like Velthon parents would. They are still prey, Zeth said, but his voice lacked conviction. Are they? Hyun asked quietly. He had been watching the cubs work through this problem on their own. What do you know about tunnel worms? The cubs thought about this. In their old training, they would have known only that tunnel worms were edible and not very dangerous. But Hyun had taught them to learn about all the creatures they encountered. They eat tunnel plants, Corvin said slowly. The poisonous ones that nothing else can digest. They process the toxins and excrete them in a form that fertilizes the soil, Nira added. Without them, large areas of the desert would become completely barren. They also dig the underground water channels that connect distant oases, Zeth concluded reluctantly. Other animals depend on the tunnels they create. So if this family dies, Hyun asked, what happens to this part of the ecosystem? The cubs were beginning to understand. This was not just about whether or not to kill and eat some trapped animals. This was about understanding their role in the larger web of life that kept Kailaron functioning. The tunnel plants would spread unchecked, Nira said. They would poison more water sources. The underground channels would eventually collapse without maintenance, Corvin added. The oases would start to dry up. Other creatures would suffer, Zeth finished, including us. But we still need food, Corvin pointed out. And they are right here, trapped and helpless. Hyun nodded. This is the kind of choice every true apex predator must face. Do you take the easy prey now, or do you think about the long-term consequences? The cubs looked at the trapped family again. The water level was rising steadily. Soon the young tunnel worms would drown if something was not done to help them. There might be another way, Nira said thoughtfully. We could help them escape, then hunt something else later. Help? Prey animals? Zeth's old training was still strong. That goes against everything we are. Does it? Corvin asked. Or does it go against everything we were taught we are? They spent several minutes debating. The old Velthon way was clear. Take the easy kill and do not worry about consequences. But the new way Hyun was teaching them suggested a different approach. Finally, they made their decision. Working together, the 3 cubs began moving the rocks that blocked the tunnel worms' exit. Their claws were much better suited to this work than the tunnel worms' digging tools. Within an hour, they had cleared a passage large enough for the family to escape. The adult tunnel worms seemed confused by this unexpected help. They made grateful chirping sounds and quickly led their young through the new opening. Before leaving completely, one of the adults approached the cubs and made a series of complex sounds. What is it saying? Zeth asked. Hyun smiled. It is telling you about the storm. Tunnel worms can sense electromagnetic changes in the Earth. It says the storm will end tomorrow at midday, and that the safest route back to the surface is through the eastern tunnels. It is sharing information, Nira said in wonder. Even though we are predators, it is helping us. Because you helped it first, Hyun explained. Cooperation creates cooperation. The next day, the storm ended exactly when the tunnel worm had predicted. As they made their way back to the surface through the eastern tunnels, they found that the path was indeed the safest route. The tunnel worms had known about unstable areas and toxic gas pockets that the cubs never would have detected, but the most important lesson was still to come. A week later, while hunting in a different part of the desert, the cubs encountered the same family of tunnel worms they had rescued. Instead of fleeing in terror, the creatures approached them calmly. They remember us, Corvin said in amazement. More than that, Hyun said. Watch. The adult tunnel worms led them to a new area where a herd of fat, slow-moving herbivores was grazing. These animals were much better prey than the tunnel worms would have been, larger, more nutritious, and they had no young to protect. They are showing us good hunting grounds, Nira breathed. Prey animals are helping us hunt other prey animals. Because you proved you could think beyond immediate hunger, Hyun said. You showed them that you understand the larger picture. Now they trust you to be a predator who takes only what is needed and preserves the balance. That night, as they prepared their meal from the hunt the tunnel worms had helped them find, the cubs reflected on what they had learned. The old way would have given us one meal, Zeth said. This way has given us better hunting grounds, reliable, information sources and allies who understand the environment better than we do. We are still predators, Corvin added. But we are predators who think. We are predators who understand that our prey is not our enemy, Nira concluded. They are part of the same system that keeps us all alive. Hyun watched them with satisfaction. The cubs were no longer just young Vilethon learning to hunt. They were becoming something new, predators who could see beyond their next meal to understand their true role in the world. Tomorrow, he said, we will visit a place where many different species work together to solve problems none of them could handle alone. You will see what is possible when predators and prey stop thinking of each other as enemies and start thinking of each other as partners in survival. The cubs settled in for the night, their minds full of new possibilities. They were beginning to understand that being an apex predator was not about being the strongest or the most feared. It was about being smart enough to keep the whole system healthy, because in the end, their own survival depended on it. Outside their shelter, the night hunters of Caileron called to each other in the darkness. But the cubs no longer heard only danger in those sounds. They were beginning to hear the complex web of relationships that made this harsh world into a functioning ecosystem. And they were learning to be a part of that web rather than just destroyers of it. 6 months had passed when Kral Vox's ship appeared in Caileron's red sky. The cubs saw it first, a dark shape moving against the crimson clouds. They had been tracking a particularly clever herd of jumping beasts, using techniques that combined traditional Vilethon hunting skills with everything Hyun had taught them about patience, observation, and environmental awareness. Father comes, Corvin said simply. There was no excitement in his voice, but no fear either. Just a statement of fact. Nira looked up from the tracks she had been studying. We are not the same cubs he left here? No, Zeth agreed. We are not. Hyun found them standing together on a ridge, watching the ship descend toward his shelter. In the distance, several of their animal allies watched as well. Sora and her pack had positioned themselves where they could observe but not threaten. The tunnel worm families had emerged from their underground homes. Even Minho, the small lizard, that had been Hyun's first introduction to the cubs, sat on a nearby rock. Are you ready for this? Hyun asked. The cubs looked at each other. 6 months ago, they would have answered with bravado and boasting. Now they simply nodded. We are ready, Corvin said. But we do not know if Father will be ready for us. Kralvox emerged from his ship with the bearing of a Veilthon Alpha Prime. He was larger than his son, his scales darker and more heavily armored. His claws were scarred from countless battles, and his eyes held the cold intelligence of a successful, apex predator. But when he saw his cubs, he stopped walking. They stood differently than they had 6 months ago. Their posture was still confident, still predatory, but there was something else now. They held themselves with a kind of calm awareness that seemed to extend beyond their immediate surroundings. They looked at him not with the submissive respect. Traditional cubs showed their alpha, but with the steady gaze of equals. "My cubs," Kralvox said formally. "You have completed your training?" "We have learned many things," Nira replied. Her voice was respectful, but not deferential. "Whether our training is complete depends on what you think we need to know." This was not the response Kralvox had expected. Traditional cubs would have immediately demonstrated their new combat skills or boasted about their hunting successes. These cubs seemed to be thinking before they spoke. "Show me what you have learned," he commanded. "What would you like to see?" Corvin asked. Again, this was wrong. Cubs should eagerly display everything they had learned, competing for their alpha's approval. These cubs were asking what he specifically wanted to know, as if they were consultants, rather than children. "Combat skills," Kralvox said firmly. "Show me you can fight." The cubs exchanged glances. Then Szeth stepped forward. "We can fight, Father, but first, may we ask why you want to see this?" Kralvox's eyes narrowed dangerously. No cub had ever questioned his commands before. "Because fighting is what Veilthon do. It is how we survive. It is what I sent you here to learn." "With respect," Szeth said calmly, "you sent us here because our people were dying in the trials. Fighting harder was not solving that problem." The Alpha Prime looked ready to strike his impertinent cub. But something in Szeth's manner gave him pause. The young Veilthon was not being disrespectful or challenging his authority. He was simply thinking out loud. "Show me," Kralvox said finally. What followed was unlike any combat demonstration he had ever seen. The cubs did not attack each other with savage intensity, as young Veilthon normally did. Instead, they moved like dancers. Each strike was precise, controlled, and served multiple purposes. They demonstrated attacks that conserved energy, defensive moves that turned opponents' strength against them, and combat techniques that ended fights quickly and efficiently. "This is not Veilthon fighting," Kralvox said when they finished. "No," Corvin agreed. "It is better than Veilthon fighting." "Better." The Alpha Prime's voice was dangerous now. "More efficient," Nira explained quickly. "Less energy wasted, lower chance of serious injury, adaptable to different opponents and situations." Hyun, who had been watching quietly, stepped forward. "Perhaps you would like to test their skills more directly?" Kralvox nodded grimly. He crouched into a fighting stance and gestured for his son to approach. "Come, Corvin. Show me how much better than Veilthon fighting you have become." What happened next shocked the Alpha Prime to his core. His son did not charge forward with typical Veilthon aggression. Instead, he moved like water around wind. Every attack Kralvox made was redirected rather than blocked. Every moment of lost balance was used to put the older Veilthon at a disadvantage. Within minutes, the Alpha Prime found himself on his back, held down not by superior strength but by superior positioning. "How?" he gasped as Corvin helped him to his feet. "I used your own force against you," Corvin explained. "I did not try to be stronger than you. I tried to be smarter than your attacks. This is what the human taught you." "This is part of what the human taught us," Szeth said. "Would you like to see the rest?" Over the next several hours, the cubs demonstrated abilities that amazed their father. They showed him how they could move through the dangerous environment of Caleron without triggering its many traps and hazards. They demonstrated their new hunting techniques, taking prey efficiently and with minimal waste. They introduced him to their animal allies and showed how these relationships provided advantages no lone predator could achieve. Most shocking of all, they took him to the great oasis where dozens of species coexisted peacefully under the water law. "You have made treaties with prey animals?" Kralvox asked in disbelief. "We have made agreements that benefit everyone," Nira corrected, "including us." "This goes against everything we are," the Alpha Prime said. But even as he spoke, he was watching how the other creatures reacted to his cubs. There was no fear, but there was respect. These animals recognized his offspring as predators, but they treated them as trustworthy predators. "Does it?" Corvin asked. "Or does it go beyond what we thought we were?" That evening, as they sat around a fire, Hyun explained the deeper principles behind the cubs' training. "Your people face extinction because they have become too rigid," he told Kralvox. "The old ways worked when the challenges stayed the same, but environments change. Prey animals evolve. New threats appear. A species that cannot adapt will die out. You think we are not adapting fast enough? I think you are not adapting at all," Hyun said bluntly. "Your cubs were dying because you kept trying to solve new problems with old solutions." Kralvox looked at his cubs, his son and the two orphans he had raised as his own. They were still clearly Valthon. They still had all their natural weapons and predatory instincts, but they had gained something else. They had gained the ability to think beyond instinct. "The trials," he said slowly. "Could they pass the trials now?" "They could do much better than pass them," Hyun said. "They could redesign them." "What do you mean?" Corvin leaned forward. "Father, what if the trials do not have to be about individual survival against impossible odds? What if they could be about demonstrating the intelligence and adaptability needed to ensure the survival of our entire species?" "The creatures in the trial grounds have evolved to work together," Nira added. "Our cubs are still trying to face them alone. That is why they die." "You are suggesting our cubs should hunt in packs?" Kralvox asked. "We are suggesting your cubs should think in systems," Zeth said. "Understand the environment they are entering. Work with its natural patterns, instead of fighting against them. Use intelligence as much as strength." Kralvox was quiet for a long time. Everything his cubs were saying challenged the foundations of Vaelthon culture, but he could not deny the evidence before his eyes. These three cubs had survived and thrived in an environment that killed most experienced warriors. They had done it not by becoming better fighters, but by becoming better thinkers. "If I bring you home," he said finally, "and you try to teach these ideas to other cubs, you will be seen as corrupted, weak. Many will challenge you to prove your worth in the old ways." "Then we will meet those challenges," Corvin said calmly. "But we will meet them our way." "And if the Council rejects your new methods?" "Then the Council will watch more cubs die while we save the ones who are willing to learn," Nira replied. "You are willing to risk being outcasts from your own people?" The three cubs looked at each other, then back at their Alpha Prime. "We are willing to risk everything to give our people a future," Zeth said simply. Kralvox studied their faces in the firelight. These were no longer the cubs he had brought to this world 6 months ago. They had become something new, something that was still Velthon, but had transcended the limitations that were killing their species. "Very well," he said at last. "We return home tomorrow. But understand this. What you have learned here will be tested in ways the human cannot prepare you for. Are you truly ready?" "We are ready, Father," Corvin said. "The question is whether our people are ready for us." As the night deepened around them, the Alpha Prime found himself looking forward to finding out the answer to that question. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten: hope for the future of the Valthon people. The return to Karathis Prime created chaos in the Valthon stronghold. Word spread quickly that the Alpha Prime's cubs had returned from their training with the human. Within hours, crowds had gathered to see what changes 6 months on a death world had wrought. What they saw confused and disturbed many of them. The three cubs walked through the stronghold with a confidence that seemed different from traditional Velthon pride. They moved with economy and purpose, their eyes constantly observing their surroundings in ways that suggested they were seeing patterns others missed. When spoken to, they responded thoughtfully rather than with the quick aggression expected from young predators. "They seem subdued," whispered Velthara to her mate as she watched their son interact with other cubs. "They seem focused," Kralvox corrected. "Watch more carefully." Velthara did watch, and gradually she began to understand what her mate meant. Corvin was not subdued. He was simply not wasting energy on displays that served no purpose. When a group of older cubs tried to provoke him into a dominance fight, he calmly declined and walked away. This should have been seen as cowardice, but somehow it came across as supreme confidence instead. The first real test came 3 days after their return. Granvel, the strongest of the senior cubs, publicly challenged Szeth to combat. Granvel was nearly adult-sized, with scars that showed his prowess in battle. He had killed 2 rivals in formal duels and was expected to pass the trials easily when his time came. "I hear you learned new fighting techniques from your human teacher," Granvel sneered as a crowd gathered in the combat circle. "Let us see how they work against real Velthon's strength." Szeth entered the circle calmly. He did not extend his claws or adopt an aggressive stance. Instead, he simply stood and waited. "Fight me!" Granvel roared, lunging forward with devastating speed. What happened next would be talked about for generations. Szeth simply was not there when Granvel's claws arrived. He moved with fluid precision, redirecting the larger cub's momentum and sending him crashing into the circle's stone wall. When Granvel attacked again, Szeth used the older cub's own strength to throw him across the circle. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes. Granvel found himself on his back, Szeth's claws at his throat without ever landing a single blow. "Yield?" Szeth said quietly. "Never," Granvel snarled. "Then learn," Szeth replied. He released his opponent and stepped back. "I do not need to kill you to prove my point. You are strong and brave, but strength and bravery without wisdom will always lose to strength and bravery with wisdom." The watching crowd was stunned into silence. A smaller, younger cub had defeated one of their strongest fighters without apparent effort. More shocking still, he had shown mercy to his defeated opponent. Word of the combat spread quickly through the stronghold and beyond. Soon, representatives from other Velthon clans began arriving to see these strangely changed cubs for themselves. Elder Thekmorn, the oldest and most traditional of the clan leaders, demanded a formal demonstration of the cubs' abilities. "These new methods trouble me," he declared to the assembled crowd. "Our strength has always come from our ferocity, our willingness to face any challenge with claws and courage. If we become soft, we become prey ourselves." Kralvox stepped forward. "Then test them, Elder. Give them a challenge worthy of your concerns." Elder Thekmorn considered this. "Very well. Let them face the trial grounds as they are now. Let us see if these new methods can succeed where traditional training has failed." A murmur went through the crowd. The trial grounds had claimed dozens of young lives in recent months. Sending cubs there before they reached full adult size was almost certainly a death sentence. "We accept," Corvin said before his father could object. The next morning, the 3 cubs entered the trial grounds while hundreds of Velthon watched from the surrounding cliffs. The trial area was a valley filled with the most dangerous creatures their world had to offer. Traditionally, cubs entered alone and had to survive for 3 days while killing at least one major predator to prove their worth. What the cubs did instead amazed everyone watching. First, they spent an hour simply observing. They mapped the territory, identified the different predator species present, and noted the environmental features that would affect hunting and survival. They worked together, sharing information and developing a comprehensive understanding of the ecosystem they had entered. "They are wasting time," Elder Thekmorn complained. "Real predators attack immediately." "Real predators who attack immediately are the ones dying," Kralvox replied grimly. The cubs' approach became clear as the day progressed. Instead of hunting the largest and most dangerous creatures, they began by understanding the relationships between different species. They identified which predators competed with each other, which ones avoided each other, and how the prey animals had adapted to survive. By the second day, they had begun what could only be called ecosystem management. They helped one group of prey animals reach a water source that had been blocked by a rockfall, knowing that this would draw certain predators away from another area. They used their knowledge of animal behavior to turn different predator species against each other, reducing the overall danger level without having to fight directly. On the third day, they achieved something unprecedented. They managed to trap and kill one of the valley's apex predators, a massive creature that had killed several adult Velthon in previous years. But they did it by working together and using intelligence rather than relying purely on strength and ferocity. When they emerged from the trial grounds, they brought with them detailed maps of safe paths, information about seasonal changes in predator behavior, and strategies that future cubs could use to improve their survival chances. "They have not just passed the trials," Velthara breathed as she watched her son and his companions exit the valley. "They have mastered them." Elder Thekmorn was forced to acknowledge their success, but he remained troubled. "They have proven their methods work," he admitted. "But at what cost? They no longer fight like Valthon. They no longer think like Valthon. What are they becoming?" "They are becoming what we need to become to survive," Kralvox said firmly. Over the following months, the three cubs began training other young Valthon in their new methods. The results were dramatic. Cubs who learned to observe and think before acting had survival rates in the trials that improved from 30% to over 90%. Not everyone was pleased with these changes. Some of the older Valthon felt that the new methods were making their people soft. There were attempts to forbid the new training, to force cubs to follow only traditional methods, but the numbers could not be argued with. Cubs trained in the new ways not only survived better, they became more effective, hunters and stronger contributors to their clans. They developed the ability to adapt to new challenges instead of simply repeating old patterns. Mirai, a young female cub who had been considered too small and weak for traditional training, became one of the most successful students of the new methods. Under the old system, she would have been relegated to a minor role in clan society. Under the new system, her intelligence and observational skills made her one of the most valuable hunters in her generation. "The human was right," she told Nira during one of their training sessions. "True strength is not about being the biggest or the fiercest. It is about being the smartest and most adaptable." The changes spread beyond just hunting and combat training. Young Valthon began approaching all aspects of their lives with the same thoughtful analysis they had learned to apply to survival challenges. They developed better strategies for resource management, more efficient ways to organize their communities, and improved methods for dealing with other species. As the seasons passed, it became clear that something fundamental had shifted in Valthon society. They remained apex predators, but they had evolved beyond simple reliance on physical dominance. They had become philosophical predators, creatures who combined their natural abilities with intelligence, planning, and understanding. Other species in the galaxy began to take notice. The Velthon had always been feared, but now they were also respected. Their new approach to problem-solving made them valuable allies rather than just dangerous enemies. Traders who had once avoided Valthon space now sought them out, knowing that these evolved predators could offer unique solutions to complex challenges. Diplomatic missions that had once been impossible became routine as the Valthon demonstrated that they could think beyond immediate aggression to consider long-term consequences. Kralvox, now recognized as the Alpha Prime who had saved his species from extinction, often thought about the human who had made this transformation possible. Park Hyun had given the Veilton something more valuable than any weapon or technology. He had given them a new way of thinking. Years later, when other struggling species sent their young to learn from Veilton teachers, Korvan would often begin his lessons the same way Hyun had begun theirs. "Sit down and watch," he would tell his new students. "Tell me what you see." And like his teachers before him, he would watch as natural predators slowly transformed into something greater. Predators who understood that true dominance came not from destroying their environment, but from mastering it through intelligence, cooperation, and wisdom.